After months of speculation, it looks like Iran and the United States will finally return to the negotiating table next week to discuss returning to the JCPOA. The talks will take place in Vienna, and the U.S. coalition will be led by Special Envoy to Iran, Robert Malley. Not everyone is thrilled by the talks, however. The French foreign minister said, quote, "If this discussion is a sham, then we will have to consider the JCPOA empty." Joining us now to weigh in is a great friend of the show, Dr. Trita Parsi. He's a professor at Georgetown University and the executive vice president of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Trita, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
And so what does it mean that that Robert Malley is the one that's going to be leading these negotiations?
So Rob has been leading these talks for now 6 or 7 rounds. The issue this time around is that this is the first round that will be taking place since the new government in Iran came into power. Patience is running out on all sides. As you saw, the French are saying that they believe that the JCPOA may prove to be empty if there's not progress made. The U.S. side has made clear that their patience is running out. At the same time, the Iranians are actually saying the same thing, because all of them are right now essentially showing too little flexibility, insisting on too much concessions from the other side without offering real concessions from their own side that can actually break up this deadlock. We have been in this situation before. Back in 2012, 2013, we were in a situation in which there was this belief openly that more pressure on Iran was needed. But deep inside, the U.S. government knew that there really wasn't much more pressure that could be brought on. And that's the situation we're in right now. The Iranians were not willing to talk directly to the U.S. So instead, what happened back then is that a secret channel was established through the Omani government. My hope right now is that there's something similar taking place, because I think the type of concessions both Iran and the U.S. need to give likely will not come in this setting, but will come in a secret channel where the two of them actually talk directly to each other, which they won't do in Vienna.
Unnamed Western diplomats told Reuters that the Biden administration may be expecting the talks to fail and is looking toward the, quote, unspoken goal of winning support from China and Russia to further pressure Iran should negotiations fall through. What do you make of that? Is that plausible?
I don't find it very plausible, mindful of the state that Chinese-American relations are in right now. I don't
Right.
find it very likely that the Chinese are going to play ball with the U.S. on this issue, particularly mindful of the fact that both the Russians and the Chinese hold that it is the U.S. that is at fault in this situation, because it was the U.S. that withdrew from the agreement under Trump. And Biden promised to get back into the deal rather quickly. There's those who argue, I would be one of them, that this could have been done much faster and better early on in Biden's administration through a couple of executive orders rather than through this very lengthy and so far unproductive negotiation process.
And why can't Iran just completely pivot towards Russia and China? What leverage does the United States still have over Iran?
I think the main reason why the Iranians are not fully doing so is because they don't want to. I mean, the JCPOA for the Iranians was a way to actually open up a pathway to be able to re-engage with the West writ large, meaning that it wouldn't just be on the nuclear issue, but there actually would be a strengthening of relations between Iran and the West, particularly the Europeans, and in extension, the United States. So there's plenty of folks in the Iranian government, including this hardline government, that don't want to completely make themselves dependent on Russia and China. That is a leverage the U.S. has. But in order for that to actually be actualized, there needs to be something on the table that is also attractive to the Iranian side. And a key issue, which we have discussed on this show before, is that currently the manner in which the sanctions relief is being offered and the absence of mechanisms to make sure that there is some form of a cost if the U.S. withdraws from the deal again, that is making the Iranians very nervous and feeling that perhaps there isn't much on the table for them.
Well, and how does the new regime, what effect does that have on the negotiations and the likelihood of a deal?
It's certainly not been a positive one, because at the end of the day, this is the government, the lead negotiators, who actually don't have the same experience in negotiating this deal. They don't know the details as well. Rob was there when the JCPOA was negotiated. The previous Iranian negotiator, Araqchi, was there as well. So these were two parties who actually knew the deal very well. They had negotiated with each other before, and as a result, could move forward in a more flexible and fast way. The new team is very hardline. They want to prove themselves to their domestic audiences. They don't have the same command of the details, etc. So that alone is causing a lot of good time to be lost.
And what's your take on Israel's latest interventions into these negotiations?
Well, one thing that is interesting is that the Biden administration early on wanted to make sure that they had greater coordination with Israel, and they wanted to see what they could do to make sure that the Israelis would not be undermining the negotiations in the manner that they did under Bibi Netanyahu. And to some extent, perhaps there's been some success in that strategy. The Israelis have been more silent. They have not been actively undermining it in the manner that they did before. But as we are getting closer to decision point here, and perhaps there will be a revival of the JCPOA, we see that the actual positions of Israel under the Bennett government and the U.S. are still diverging. The Israelis are still talking about a nuclear weapons capability, meaning that they don't want any enrichment in Iran at all. The U.S. is not there to prevent enrichment. The U.S. is there to prevent a nuclear weapon. And we see that the Bennett government still favors more maximum pressure, the very same strategy that got us into this disastrous position we're in right now, and are not at all as favorable towards the talk, even though, very interestingly, more and more Israeli officials are now coming out and admitting that the pressure they put on the United States to walk out of the deal has been absolutely disastrous because the Iranian nuclear program is now more advanced than it ever has been before.
Dr. Trita Parsi, we really appreciate you being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we'll be back with more Rising right after this.